Thomas Kuhn's view of science is centered on the idea of the paradigm. Recall that a paradigm is a set of theories, concepts, methods and so on that the scientific community accepts as unproblematic. The paradigm determines the way that that scientific discipline views the world. It sets the standards for what is good and bad science. And it isn't criticized, except during phases of crisis that may lead to a scientific revolution and a paradigm shift. Now, Kuhn immediately realized that if this description of paradigms is correct, it has a huge impact on the way that we should understand scientific progress. So that's what I want to talk about in this lecture: paradigms and progress. In doing so, we will learn about a second very important concept from Kuhn's philosophy: incommensurability. But we'll get there in a moment. Let us start by painting a traditional picture of scientific progress. The traditional idea is that scientists just learn more about the world as time goes on. Historians know more now than they knew 50 years ago, and they knew more 50 years ago than 100 years ago. The same is true about linguists, physicists, anthropologists, scholars of literature, and so on. As time goes on, scientists find out more true facts and more true theories, and these get added to the building of science. So that building is basically growing and growing and growing, and that's what progress consists in. Now, even the traditional picture isn't quite that simple. Sometimes scientists make mistakes, and it takes time to recognize the mistakes. So once in a while, a part of the building of science has to be demolished, and something else has to be built to fill up the hole. But on the traditional picture of scientific progress, these holes are relatively small. They don't cause the collapse of big parts of the building. Overall, the accumulation of knowledge is a smooth process. Kuhn, however, points out that once you accept his theories of paradigms, a very different picture emerges. We must remember that paradigms set the standard for what is good and what is bad science. Scientists who use the theories of the paradigm, who employ its concepts and methods, and who share its worldview, will be judged to be doing good science. Scientists who don't, who go against the paradigm, are not taken seriously. But if that's true, then during a scientific revolution, when one paradigm is changed for another, it's not just a few theories that are changing, but the very idea of what constitutes good science. Galilei and Aristotle have very different ideas of what good science looks like. So do Chomsky and Skinner, or a modern biologist and an 18th century biologist. Before and after the revolution, people have different standards for science. But if that's the case, then what happens to scientific progress? For if I say that science shows progress, I am claiming that current science is better than past science. But which standards am I using to make that claim? If I am using the standards of the current paradigm, then sure, the current paradigm, the current science is better, because it obviously fits the standards of the current paradigm better than the older science did. If, on the other hand, I use the standards of the old paradigm, then the old paradigm and the old science is probably better than the current science. Galilei thought Galilean science was better than Aristotelian science, but Aristotle would have had a rather different opinion. Chomsky thought that his way of studying language was better than Skinner's, but Skinner certainly didn't agree. So was there scientific progress when these revolutions happened? Galilei and Chomsky would say yes, but Aristotle and Skinner might well say no. And there doesn't seem to be an objective, neutral way of finding out who is right. What Kuhn points out then is that there is no neutral standard that we can use to assess which of two paradigms is better. Kuhn introduces a technical term to capture this idea: incommensurability. Literally, it means not together measurable. In other words, two things are incommensurable when they cannot be compared using a standard that is appropriate to both. According to Kuhn, rival paradigms are incommensurable. There is no neutral, objective way to say which is better. What does all that mean for scientific progress? Kuhn draws the radical conclusion that you just can't say that a new paradigm is better than an old paradigm. So there is no objective scientific progress when a scientific revolution takes place. There is scientific progress during periods of normal science. Then scientists really are building up a structure of knowledge which gets higher and higher. But when a scientific revolution comes along, the standards used by the earlier scientists are no longer adhered to, which means that the structure that they have built collapses. The new paradigm will have to start mostly from scratch. So instead of the traditional view, where scientific progress is constant and continuous, Kuhn sees progress as something that happens between revolutions. But when a revolution comes, most of the old science is discarded, and you can't really speak of progress anymore. These claims of Kuhn about incommensurability and progress have proved to be very controversial. Many people have tried to claim against Kuhn that even during revolutions there is some progress, and that paradigms are not really incommensurable. For instance, people have said that scientists in the old paradigm and scientists in the new paradigm often acknowledge the same observations, and that both want to explain and maybe predict those observations. If one paradigm turns out to be much more successful at this than the other paradigm, then we can say that the superior paradigm is objectively better than the less successful one. If you agree with that line of thinking, you might want to claim that Aristotle, if he had been around to see the results of Galileo's paradigm, would have come to agree with Galilei. But whether that's really true, and who is right, Kuhn, who insists that there are no neutral and objective standards, or his critics, who insist that there are some neutral and objective standards, is very much up for debate.